Hey guys, Dr. Rose here, and I'm here today to talk to you guys about something that's relevant to all of us, and that's relationships, right? If you're in a relationship, been in a relationship, want to get in a relationship, this talk is for you. Today, I'm going to be discussing the 4 R's of ruined relationships. The 4 R's of ruined relationships. I'm trying to say that word right because my kids always tease me that I always screw up that word. It's just one of those, we all have those words, and ruined is that word for me. So you guys know what I mean. The 4 R's of messing up your relationship. What I mean by that is these are the things you want to avoid. These are the things that you do not want to find yourself falling into the trap of doing if you want your relationship to be healthy, if you want your relationship to be viable. 4 R's of ruined relationships. Now, in full disclosure, I have to share 3 of those R's of ruined relationships is something that over 25 years ago, I learned from taking a Tony Robbins course. You know, he had a series on self-empowerment, and there was a section on that series where he talked about relationships. And I found it so fascinating when he shared those 3 R's. And since that time, now going into my 26th year of practice this year in private practice, I can tell you working with hundreds of couples over the years that I see firsthand. Hell, I've experienced firsthand how these 4 R's can devastate a relationship. Relationships that may have had some viability, may have really been able to survive if we had just avoided the pitfalls of these 4 R's. And as I mentioned, Tony Robbins gave 3, but I'm going to add one that I think is crucial too. And I've kind of implemented it over the years as well. So I'm going to go over the 4 R's and then I will discuss how we avoid going into those R's. But the first R's of ruined relationship is resentment. Resentment. What is resentment? Resentment is basically a negative emotion that we have when we feel like we've been wronged by someone, when we feel like we've been treated unfairly, or when someone we feel is failing to take our feelings into consideration. How many of us have experienced some type of resentment at one time or another? And everybody's hands should be going up because this is very common in relationships. But again, this is the first R. So this is like your warning sign. You know, when you start feeling resentful towards your partner, that's a clear indication that it's time to do something to avoid going to these next R's. Because once you start going down this slippery slope of these other R's, it's very hard at times to get back up. It's very hard to close that gap. Every time you go on to the next R, you're building more and more of a gap between you and the other person. Sometimes gaps can be so huge you can't fill them. So resentment is the first R. The second R is regression. What is regression? Regression is a return to a former or less developed state. What do I mean by that? So this is where you start fighting over little stuff, right? This is where, you know, when you regress, think about when you've heard probably in psychological terms, someone regress to an earlier stage. So you're acting like a child, basically. The arguments are silly. You're arguing over insignificant things. I see it all the time in therapy when they come in and they want to spend an entire hour talking about the argument over something, you know, as mundane as leaving the top off the orange juice in the refrigerator. Yes, that may have been something that a person resented initially, but now it's become something that has caused them to regress when they're in this argument. It's never about the orange juice. It's never about the top off the toothpaste. It's never about any of those things. Again, when you start finding yourself arguing over these simple things, or again, like I said, resorting to an earlier stage of development. So you guys are acting like children now, arguing over this stuff. What happens when you go to regression is that logical part of the brain starts to shut down. You're not even thinking rational. You're just going to that very primitive, early parts of our brain where it's all coming from a place of emotion. And that's when, you know, all that rational thinking shuts down. And again, this is going down that slippery slope. People don't fight fair when they're in this stage of regression. It's saying things. You ever see a kid? Kids, they have no mercy, right? And so when you are in this regressive state, sometimes you find yourself not having any mercy, saying things that you really don't mean, but words can tear deep. So you want to be careful about that. Last R of ruined relationships is repression. What is repression? You've pretty much just subdued your feelings now. You've checked out. You've checked out. You're not angry anymore. You've kind of just washed your hands of the situation. If you're living with this person, if it's your significant other that you're living with, it's like you guys have become roommates at this time. You're not even, interacting with each other. Again, you've gone down this slippery slope. You didn't handle the resentment. You didn't handle the regression. Now you find yourself in this repressed state where you're not even sharing anymore how you feel. You guys are just continuing on. It's like roommates. There's love there, but there's so much other stuff that has created barriers to getting to that love that you guys aren't able to even connect with each other. And the fourth R that I've seen over the years, that if you allow yourself to get here, it's a wrap. It's really a wrap. It's pretty much a wrap at repression, but when you find partners with this refusal. And what do I mean? Refusal to get help, refusal to change, refusal to go to therapy, refusal to understand, regardless of what the issue is, it's an issue of both of y'all. It's usually not just one-sided. It's both people that need to be involved in it. And so often people have such a fear of going in for therapy or getting help for valid reasons. I had someone recently tell me that, after, and this happens all the time, especially when men come to counseling, but he told me recently he was so afraid to come to counseling after his first session. He said that session was amazing. It was couples counseling, but he complimented how good he felt afterwards. And he regretted not coming in sooner, when his significant other suggested that he come in. And I asked the question, I said, well, what prevented you in the past from doing that? And he said, quite honestly, he was afraid of hearing something in counseling that he didn't want to hear. So, understandably, that's understandable, right? But at the same time, that refusal to go to counseling or to get the help or figure out what you guys need to do to get things back on track, there's no way in the world that you can close that gap in the relationship. Resentment, regression, repression, and refusal. How do you avoid it? As far as resentment, when you feel that resentment coming in, you have to communicate. You have to speak up right away when you feel like you've been wronged or you feel like someone's not taking your feelings into consideration. The worst thing you can do is not speak on it right then and there. Oftentimes what people do with their resentment, they just start gathering little pebbles of resentment. They did this on a Monday that kind of pissed me off. They did this on a Wednesday that had me upset. They did this on a Friday that disregarded my feelings. And the other person could very well be clueless that you are gathering these pebbles. And then you get together and something happens and all of a sudden there's this avalanche of all these rocks you've gathered coming down, and the other person can be in the dark, which causes the other person to have resentment. But when you find yourself in this state of resentment because you're not communicating your needs and wants, you know what happens? You inevitably start to become the person being more passive aggressive. And again, as I mentioned, your partner may be totally clueless that you've been harboring all this resentment because you're not communicating it with them. So there's a quote that says, resentment is like setting yourself on fire and waiting for other people to die of smoke inhalation. To avoid that even first R of ruined relationships is to communicate. When you feel wrong, slighted, feel like you've been treated unfairly or unjustly, you have to communicate it immediately and consistently. These are the keys to a good relationship. If you handle the resentment part of communicating, oftentimes you don't even have to worry about getting to the regression part. But the regressive part is to understand that when you are in this state of just your emotions are heightened and you're feeling angry or disregarded, to understand that it's natural for all of us to just really connect with that very primitive part of our brain that is just spewing and coming from a place of emotion, a place of fight or flight. And you have to find out what works for you to bring yourself back to a state of being rational, back to a state of being logical in your thought process and in your communication. That may mean you tell your partner, give me give me a little bit. We'll come back and we'll communicate, but I just need a breather, or, or even when I say give a breather, maybe taking a few deep breaths to just really calm that physiological state of yours down. But by all means, you want to avoid going back to these primitive earlier stages of development and fighting unfairly, because there's so much that can be said and done during those times that really creates even a bigger issue for you to come back from. And as far as the repression, subduing your feelings and checking out, you want to just keep a good gauge on yourself. When you find yourself doing that, when you find that you're no longer even expressing things that displease you anymore, you've got to have an honest conversation with yourself and know that at this point, if it all goes back to communication, you don't communicate, if you don't acknowledge and communicate how you feel, it will be virtually impossible for you all to come back from this subdued state of existence with each other. Now, quite honestly, people can live forever like that. I've had patients come in here who will tell me stories of what wasn't on them or their parents who were married 50 years, but for 35 years, they lived in separate bedrooms, or they were more like roommates, or, grandpa had a girlfriend over here, grandma had a boyfriend over there. They literally decided to just live and exist in this repressed marriage. Now, to each his own, but I personally don't think that that's living your best or most fulfilled life when you have to, just operate from this repressed state. And again, the last one, the refusal. Understand that there is, we are all changing. There's nothing that should be static about us at all. If you're in a relationship for any length of time, both people are going to change, as they should. And so it's so necessary for individuals to have a consistent habit of checking in with each other to find out, where are we? Where do we want to go? Are there needs you feel that aren't getting met? Are there desires that you have that you'd like to share with me? This is where the checking in, this is where the counseling sometimes, this is where you have to realize that there's more to gain by bringing in the tools, the resources, or the people that can help keep your marriage healthy or bring your marriage or relationship back to a healthy state. This is where you have to understand there's more to gain by being open and agreeable to this outside help than there is to lose from it. So there you have it, guys. The 4 R's of ruined relationship: resentment, regression, repression, and refusal. Share your thoughts on this. What are you going to do to avoid just finding yourself in these pitfalls of these 4 R's, or what have you done in the past that have worked for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep living your life in full bloom.